thank our panel for taking time.
University.
As Jim said, a very mobile work.
But of course, if you look at where we are in terms of
Corporation tax is going to be reduced to 17%, and that's good. I think that attracts business.
Just before I throw this out onto the floor, I'm sure you've got lots of questions you want to ask. Just one point. All three of you mentioned yesterday's budget. Of course, the main headline, other than the sugar tax, is the fact that George Osborne has raised the threshold for the top rate of tax. With that, and also, as Jim mentioned about Northern Ireland and corporation tax, two questions, I suppose. First is, do you personally see merit in George Osborne's move to raise the threshold, firstly? And secondly, would you like to see the Scottish Government doing what the Northern Ireland Government's been doing, which is basically banging a drum for reduced corporation tax? May I ask Jim first, please?
Well, as I said earlier, I think it makes sense to look at having the powers to reduce corporation tax. You may not do it to the same extent, but I think the Scottish Government should have the powers because that's a lever that can help stimulate business growth. So I'm totally in favour of that, and it was one of the reasons that I was really keen on more powers coming, and in fact, independence at the time, because that was the only way to get more powers. We talked about this no detriment clause that's in now. We've used it to our benefit, I think, recently. But what it does mean is that, and at the Calman Commission and then later with Smith, the rule that was laid down first was whatever you come up with, it can't mean that Scotland's got an advantage over other parts of the UK. And that's exactly what you need to offset the advantages that are in other places in the UK. So, you need to have the ability to change these taxes, I think.
Sure. In terms of the threshold for the top rate of tax, do you think the government's done the right thing?
Well, I don't think they needed to do that just now. I mean, there's a, I suppose there's a lot of pressure on middle class earners that fall into that range, living in expensive areas around London. So, it's a high cost of living. So maybe that's what's driving the policy. That's why I think we need more devolved powers throughout the UK so that you can fit the policies to suit the area.
Same question, thank you, Jim. To Fiona Hyslop, please.
I agree with Jim. I mean, the issue is why do it now? I think what we saw yesterday from George Osborne was a highly political budget. All budgets are political to some extent, but I think there's a lot of internal Conservative Party leadership contest activity going on, not just in that, but in, I will punt it, the Sunday Times Brodies next event as well. So I think, I've got concerns there. There are opportunities to do other things. VAT, very important in terms of issues for this city and the tourism industry, for example, that could have been done. And we've advocated tackling some of the excessive VAT issues. Again, looking at Ireland, the growth in revenues that are coming in because of reduction in VAT for the tourism industry has been quite extensive in Ireland. Similarly for APD. And in terms of corporation tax, of course you can do things quite creatively. And it's not just about necessarily the amounts and the rates. It's been quite targeted for specific areas. Think about Scotland, renewable energies industry, creative industries, where we've got our competitive edge, where we can do things in relation to exports. So one of the reasons we need to have those powers and we don't have, and that's what's so frustrating, is we've got, as I think quite rightly David's mentioned in relation to spend aspects, so much of the powers that are being passed in the Scotland Bill are about spend issues. They're not actually about how do you generate more growth to underpin that. And I agree with that analysis that we want more people to be paying more tax, not necessarily in amounts of tax, but the actual tax take. And that can happen at all levels, not just at the higher level, but also throughout Scotland. Higher quality jobs, again tied back to the productivity, is one of the ways to really get that stimulus. And that's why there are things that we already have, powers we already have, we have to focus on.
Okay, and to you, David, what's the same question?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm in favour of cutting corporation tax. I think it does actually work, as Jim illustrated, through Ireland. Other countries have done it as well, and it does actually work in terms of attracting organisations and companies to your country and building your economy. In terms of higher rate thresholds, personally I would love to see them going up. I think probably it's the wrong time to do them. I think he's got other priorities at the moment. But I think the, I mean, I hate income tax anyway. I just think it's an Icarus thing. I mean, I'd far rather you kept all your money and then you paid lots of money if you spent it. But that's a personal belief. It's not an IOD even belief. But I just think another thing is, somebody said to me, it's a really interesting thing, that the thing that the politicians in Scotland should really have pushed to get control of is national insurance, because nobody notices it. And you can really use it effectively to support employers, and you can play about with it quite a lot. Income tax is the least popular tax. I mean, asked the question, somebody asked me recently who was the last Chancellor to increase income tax. I'm sure Kenny and others will know, but it's quite a long time ago. You know, so we need to think about it. Dennis Healy, because it's not a popular tax to increase. Where national insurance gets increased all the time, you never notice it. Indeed, it's been decreased a little bit last time, nobody noticed that either, sort of thing. So, yeah, there's a bit more. I think we need to think about, I think overall, if I was going into Parliament, I'd be thinking overall of the whole package of taxation and looking for a radically different solution at a local and national level, a completely different solution. Because going in to, say, tax this very small band of people in Scotland who virtually don't exist is not going to get you anywhere, and taxing anybody is going to be extremely unpopular, so why not think about doing it differently? And I'm quite attracted to the idea of council tax and income tax in some way merging. I don't know how it would work. Very in favour of local business rates going back to local authorities. A whole lot of things you could play about with.
Thanks, David. Okay, we'll throw it out to our audience. Any questions? Just please raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. Gentleman there on the right-hand side, please. Just introduce yourself and ask a question, please, sir.
Yes, Donald McCrae, economist. One of the most impressive parts of the current administration's track record, it has been the way that spending on capital and investment and infrastructure has been maintained and actually even increased in the last few years in Scotland. And that's been achieved through a number of ways, not just through the DEL, the so-called straightforward DEL grant from Westminster. And it's shown through, of course, in the growth performance of the Scottish economy, which, although it has been disappointingly low, it's showing through quite a lot in construction activity, which, of course, is partly dependent on the investment spend. So my question for you, particularly to Fiona, is are you going to be able to maintain that rate of investment, infrastructure, capital spend in the next Parliament, given what we heard yesterday in the budget and of course, the new powers, including, of course, borrowing?
Very important question. Your analysis is absolutely right in terms of, as it would be, I'm a great admirer of your work, is the capital investment. When we knew the recession was coming, one of the first things we did was look at the budget to see how can we keep capital investment going, and we shifted revenue into capital, which meant that we had a real kind of pressure on all of our revenue budgets. But we also then front-forwarded a lot of our particularly European social fund investment. So a lot of, for example, I remember West Lothian College using a European social fund to help with supporting apprenticeship work by building in new capital investments, so colleges, universities, but also in terms of the other activity. You've got the bridge now. We also had the biggest railway infrastructure in my constituency, actually, the Basket Airdrie line for a century. So capital investment really, really important. That's why I mentioned at the beginning that coming down the track, I mean, there are real pressures. I'm not sure how much people are aware in terms of public sector investment. The capital reductions are enormous, so therefore how do we use borrowing intelligently? I talked about even within the cultural sector, trying to take pressure off capital by using financial transactions tax over a longer term. I've been trying to do that in my brief. Every minister has to be an economy minister. I've always said that in our international work, and we must always think about how we can use those opportunities. But the mention about national insurance, by the way, and the pension aspects, the real pressures on budgets, if you're trying to use investment for capital investment, but you're also having to shoulder, not just obviously public sector companies, but all companies are kind of having a look at the added pension burden, the national insurance is actually taking a big toll. So there's that squeeze from different areas, a squeeze and reduction in capitals available to us, squeeze in pressure on revenue for that we can't therefore be a bit smart and clever like using the Scottish Futures Trust and using revenue in different areas. So do we have the vision and intention that we want to use capital investment as a continuing stimulus? Yes, it's one of the 4 key areas of the government economic strategy we want to take forward. How we do that will be challenging, but opportunities when the bridge comes to fruition, how we might use borrowing intelligently on that but it has to be in a way that's obviously sustainable. John Smith set his rules as to what that might be, and that's very important in terms of not getting us into the kind of PFI drain that you see in terms of the public sector finances going forward. So do we want to do it? Yes. How do we do it? That's a challenge. So ideas and discussion as part of that engagement would be very welcome.
I think Jim might be interested to hear whether you believe it's sustainable, this kind of infrastructure investment. Sorry, for Jim McColl. Yeah, as a private businessman, I mean, is it sustainable, the amount of money we're putting into infrastructure
well, I think it isn't. In fact, I think we should be going a bit further, you know, maybe using some of the borrowing powers, because there's a lot of investment still needed in infrastructure in Scotland, and I would be looking at ways to go further, creative ways to go further with the capital investment.
Would you...
Sorry, if I could just say, you know, yesterday I came back from Sydney, and you know, they've got a plan to grow their population from 5 million to 7 million by 2025, and they're already investing in the infrastructure. Very impressive what they're doing around Sydney with infrastructure investment, and it's creating a lot of jobs, and it's having a real good stimulus effect in that economy. And I think that's the kind of thing we need to be doing here.
Yeah, I mean, does that, dare I ask, David, would you think it's a good idea then if we started issuing kilts, the so-called Scottish Government bonds, or?
Yeah, absolutely, I'm up for that. I mean, I think the Scottish Futures Trust, personally, it's been a very good organisation. I think it's been worthwhile doing it. Welcome the infrastructure investment the Scottish Government's done. I think it's been fantastic. And as I say, if you speak to anybody down south and we've built a railway, they're just astonished. They don't know what that means really at all. I haven't seen it for about 200 years, sort of thing. So we are doing great things. The Forth Crossing, for me personally, will be brilliant. Better than the one that's there, as I've experienced yet again this morning. So there's some great stuff going on, and I welcome it. But we've still got a road to Inverness, which is a national embarrassment. And added to a single-track railway to Inverness, which means you have to stop every 10 minutes for the other trains to pass. I mean, that's supposed to be a developing part of our country. We're so far behind, we've got massive catch-up, and I agree with Jim. I mean, if you actually, it's interesting, you go to America as well, because I spend a bit of time in Italian, and the golf courses of Florida every November, and the infrastructure spend in Florida is phenomenal, okay? Now, that's all part of fundamentally the Obama plan. Bluntly, the Americans are not even interested in paying for it. They haven't had a budget for about 5 years. The Republicans probably will never have a budget, and they just keep spending. But it's having a massive impact in that area. It's just phenomenal in terms of new infrastructure, hospitals, everything like that. So I'm for spending, but I would like to pay for it in longer term, unlike Obama. But I think, yes, having Scottish bonds or whatever it takes to do it, let's go for it, absolutely.
And that could be a critical difference in taking this forward. In 2010, I met with, it was the British Irish Council, so we had Wales, Northern Ireland, UK government, Irish government. And what was interesting in 2010, a third of the capital investment growth was coming from Scotland across the UK, a third. Now, that was when we didn't have the powers that we have now. So the issue is how can we continue to have that capital investment, but borrowing, I mean, it's only £500 million only, compared to what we were able to do before. But the issue is how can we be smart with it? I think that's the part. And you talk about the railway, that Basket Airdrie line, you've now got communities in my constituency, you've got the house building area, you've got the infrastructure requirements for schools, education, and that's private sector, getting contracts and being able to develop and maintain. And sustaining that means that through the recovery, I talked about the resilience of Scotland compared to the rest of the UK to an extent. We've already done that to date. What can we do going forward? And I think that's the bit about how can we share that ambition and be creative at a time when actually the pressures going forward are even more in public sector terms than they've been in the past.
Okay, any other questions? Please feel free to put your hand up. A gentleman there. I can take a couple if anyone wants to.
Hi, Alex Quayle from BP actually, but these questions don't represent BP's views. So I think this is an interesting discussion. I've been very interested because I'm actually, my work is based in England, but I live here in Edinburgh with my wife. And looking at the Scottish economy, listening to your comments about stable tax and also sustainable tax, and around ownership, I was particularly interested, David, in your comments on ownership of raising the revenue as well as spending the revenue. One of the things that strikes me is I've looked a lot into the different arguments for and against independence, and being in oil and gas, of course, being acutely aware of the loss of income recently in that industry. But one of the questions that I think has to be out there for Scotland is, in the future, Scotland spends a lot more per capita than the rest of the UK in terms of public expenditure. It's frequently quoted that the figures are £2,000–3,000 more than, say, the southeast. So has there got to be a bit more ownership around getting control of those costs? And David, you mentioned, for example, having more local authorities than perhaps is needed. I think there's been some great work on the police side of things, reducing to the single.
You'll forgive me, Alex. Could you just state the question?
So absolutely. So the question is really, what do you think about? Is the priority really getting those costs down as much as it is about raising new taxes?
David, what?
Yeah, absolutely it is. I really do think we should. I mean, I personally welcome the changes in the police force. And if for no other reason, you cut the salaries of 8 chief constables, sort of thing. But I wasn't totally appreciative of how it's done, and I still don't think it's bedded in very well. It's a bit like this change of 43 colleges to 16, which means why would 5 million people have 43 colleges? It's just madness. But the way it's been done hasn't actually been very helpful to delivering, and we've got a lecturer strike through, which partly caught up in that as well. So I think that there's some challenge about how you do things, but absolutely I'm very strongly in favour of looking at what we actually have to deliver for the benefit of the people of Scotland at all levels, and then look at how we deliver it. But we are terrible in Scotland for saying it's I-being. We can't change our education system. Why? It's not doing as well as it should. We've got curriculum for excellence, but Jim's got a fantastic initiative which we'll happily talk about going on. Let's do things differently and break things up and make them better and make them deliver. Health service is fantastic, world leading. It's also world leading in terms of expense, so let's look at that as well. On your point about expense, it's funny, I just was in Birmingham the last couple of days actually, and somebody on the local news bemoaning the fact that in that part of the world they spend £600 per head on transport. In London it's £2,600 per head, and if George Osborne goes ahead with Crossrail 2, so let's be a wee bit cautious about how much we spend in Scotland. In relative terms, in London, the Crossrail is the biggest project Britain's ever seen by far. It dwarfs anything else we've ever seen. So people in London throwing stones at Scotland saying, you cost a lot of money, I've got a bit of a brass neck in my opinion.
Jim McColl.
I don't think it's an entirely valid comparison, because if you've got a very high density of population as you have in the southeast, then of course there are economies of scale. So it does cost you more to deliver some services in the Highlands and Islands than it does in the southeast of England. So, it's a figure that's bandied about quite often by politicians and south of the border, but it's not a valid comparison. You can't come down to a standard cost per head, but and again for infrastructure, as David mentioned, if you look at the spend per head in London on some of the huge infrastructure projects, and then you look even at the northeast of England, don't look at, it's a fraction of what's spent. So if there was a bit better balance on developing the infrastructure across the UK and, going back to the capital investment side, that would have a huge impact on the economies right across the UK outside of the southeast.
Fiona, Hyslop.
I think we need to get beyond this rhetoric of somehow, Scotland, we spend more, so that's a bad thing. No, we've got a third of the landmass of the UK. We've got an absolutely stunning, beautiful, wonderful country. We want people to live in all of it. And if you're living in rural Scotland, of course you're going to want to have education, health. So therefore the spend per head will be more in Scotland than the rest of the UK. And I will leave the gentleman to talk about London not throwing stones. I'll leave that up to them. But in terms, I think of how we provide, our biggest challenge is an ageing population, and making sure that in terms of support for the over 75s, we have got the social care in these remote and rural and even semi-rural areas that, you when you get older, but certainly many of us in this room will have parents that need care to stay at home, and that will cost money. And unless we actually, and again, I'm interested in the population drive in Australia, unless we actually start moving and making sure we've got, you know, productive, high-quality jobs, but make sure that we've got the population growing from those that can pay tax and are working. And one of the most salutary things that I saw last week was that, and it might just be, again, a temporary blip, and, you know, statistics be, you know, just watch with care, but there was the first year out of 9 that we had more deaths than births. We've been doing very well in Scotland, having more births than deaths. Most of that from migration. Most of that from very welcome workers coming to this country, paying taxes, far more taxes than they're receiving in benefits, but also bringing up their families here. And actually, that's one of the challenges we have. So it's not just looking at things in the round. It's not simple things about tax rates here and there and higher rate. It's actually about how do you make sure you've got all your policies are helping grow that workforce, a productive workforce in higher paid, higher quality jobs. And it's the round that I think will drive Scotland forward, not just looking at things in isolation.
Thank you, Fiona. Anyone else? Question? A gentleman there. If you can keep it short, please. We're close to approaching our deadline.
Sandy Cross from Rossi House Investments. I wondered if the panel could give a view as to whether 50% is too high or too low as an upper rate of income tax.
Fiona Hyslop, I think, if you don't mind.
You're a plant from the Sunday Times to get the headline for the weekend. I mean, we'll be setting out our views in our manifesto going forward in terms of what we can do for future years. But clearly, in terms of where we stand just now, we've got the powers that we have. We've already made a statement about we're not varying on the 10p, we're keeping the 10p as it is. But in terms of the move, I agree with the gentleman here in terms of where we're going in terms of the higher rate. It's not, even if you wanted to have this, it's not something you would do. Why do it now? You do it now for political reasons, for domestic, internal conservative reasons. I don't think you're necessarily doing it for the economy.
So, sorry, I got rather lost there. Is that you support the idea or not?
No, I'm just saying I don't see it change. You know, the point is, do you want to change it? And I said in terms of like what would set out in the future, we'll set that out in our manifesto. But in terms of where we are now, you know, the reductions that's planned, obviously it's a staggered reduction, and that's obviously been a statement made as of only yesterday. So, you know, I agree with the gentleman here. Well, I think we are where we are. We don't have powers over this as yet, so I'm not going to express a view.
Okay. Jim McColl.
Well, absolutely too high. I don't think there's any further discussion.
David Watt.
I think there's 2 or 3 points where this is really interesting. There's a good deal of research actually by top economists and David Bell and a whole lot of other people have looked at this. And if you actually start increasing tax by more than 3%, people will survive 3% up or down sort of thing. But if you start doing the 5%, they start to vote with their feet. And I'll give you an example. When it went up to 50%, before I was sitting, I mean, the typical budget was one day, next day I was sitting in the early bird down to London, and one of my members sat down beside me and said, "David, I'm not paying it." And I was busily reading the paper. I didn't even clock what he was talking about. I said, "What do you mean you're not paying it?" He said, "I'm not paying that tax transfer announced yesterday." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I've been on to my accountant, I'm not paying it." And he wasn't going to pay it. Already within 12 hours he'd fixed it. He wasn't going to pay this increase in tax. So people are mobile, they're agile, they're very able, they won't pay it. And I mean, I've talked seriously to some of the top people in the top accountancy firms in the world, and they will tell you, you just won't get the money because they will move out your country, they'll find other ways of offshoring it, you actually won't get the money unless the government's smarter. And on that point, by the way, the George Osborne thing, politicians keep blaming all of us for not paying tax. It's them that can't collect it properly. It's not us that don't pay it. You know, they don't actually know if they set the rules properly, simply, people would pay tax. But yeah, there is a threshold, and there's a good deal of research, academic research, that says when you get to 50%, people really dig their heels in and say, "That's enough of my pound going to the tax man. I just won't pay it. I'll find a way of not paying it." So I think 45 is seen as, I say, by research, an absolute maximum, and I personally strongly agree with that. As I said earlier, I don't like income tax. I think people should be rewarded for working. In America, the basic rate of tax, and it's quite a complex system, as you probably know, is about 35%. And as my friends say to me, anybody that pays 35% should be locked up, you know, because they just don't do it. They've got interest relief on their boats, their cars, their houses, and everything like that. So it's a completely different system. And I think we should look around the world and look for better methods of collecting money.
Thanks, Dave. I'll take one more question, I think, if anyone's got one. or failing that, just out of curiosity, just a quick hand count here. How many people would actually benefit from the George Osborne's announcement on raising the higher tax threshold yesterday? Just a show of hands? Just one person, goodness me. Two?
No, most people would.
Two, three, yeah. Four.
Now,
Don't be shy, come on. I'm not the tax man. Yeah, quite a few. I mean, just finally then, I think to summarise, Scots, by the look of things now, will be paying a higher tax rate over the next year than the counterparts in England. Are you worried by that? Is that something that the Scottish Government now are being held hostage to? They'll have to react to things that happen in Westminster?
Well, we always have to react to things that are happening in Westminster. We'll get an opportunity to set out what our intentions are in our manifesto, but we've clearly in the decision we take about the powers we already have. I think there's a confusion between the existing powers that we have from the old Scotland Act or the second Scotland Act and the one that's coming in the Scotland Bill. And in terms of the income tax rates, we've maintained the situation of the 10p will remain at the 10p.
Yeah. I'll give everyone one very brief minute just to summarise their view. If you'd like to start, Jim, please.
summarise the view on...
Well, just summarise, just based on the discussion today, where you feel about taxation. Is this
well, I think, you know, I've made it quite clear that I don't think we don't have the powers. What we need are powers to increase jobs, increase high-quality jobs, and that means attract more businesses in. We're way below where we should be in number of businesses in Scotland, and we're way below where we should be in startups, and that's the kind of powers we need. And also getting back to skills, we do produce a lot of people out of university. I think we lose a lot of that resource, and at the other end, we're not helping people right at the bottom in the trapped area. You know, if you look at Glasgow alone, which I've been looking at, there are over 700 kids leave school at fourth year. Now, 500 of them go to what's called a positive destination, but that can mean a 2-day course on getting ready for work. Schools are allowed to tick a box that say that's a positive destination. However, there's 141 in Glasgow that don't even go on to things like that. And they spend 4 years at secondary school, 2 of which are probably wasted. It costs, or the government invests, the state invests 6,500 a year in their education, half of which is wasted. So 26,000 is invested in them. A kid that goes all from a better off family, better area, that goes all the way through to university, gets 75,000 invested in them. And nobody is addressing those kids at the bottom. They're not being addressed just now. Although we talk about equality of opportunity, it's not there, and it needs to be there, because we're lacking in technicians and skills. We're not lacking in graduates in Scotland. And you know, I've got a school, a junior college that we set up for 13 and 14-year-olds to get them into work. And I had an approach from Ayrshire, from a large company, saying, do you have anyone? We're looking for 6 technicians and we can't recruit them. Is there anyone graduating from your school that we could fill those jobs with? They can get plenty of graduates, but they can't get the technician people. So, you know, we really need to think seriously about these people that are in the poverty trap and get them out of it by giving them good skills, and we're not doing that just now.
Fiona Hyslop, your Education Secretary?
I was for 2 years, and I also managed to secure the budget that increased modern apprenticeships from 14,000 to 25,000, and then the ambition now is 30,000. And why is that important? Because you need public sector funding to help support those apprenticeships. And probably you're looking at the title of this morning's event, what will new powers for Holyrood mean for corporate Scotland? Well, one of the things that John Swinney managed to do in the negotiations with the Treasury is to make sure, in terms of that public spend that we do have in Scotland, that he managed to make sure that the Treasury, who I'm sure all of us in different shapes or forms, and indeed internally within the UK, in governments within the UK, have battles with the Treasury to ensure that they can get the best deal possible. But we've managed not only to make sure they didn't reduce our budget by 7 billion or the 3 billion, which was the represented offer, but we've managed to make sure that we've saved a situation where actually there's no detriment. So we have protected, by a strong focused determination by John Swinney, protected our public service spending. Our issue is now, how do we do it in the round collectively forward, whether it's tackling young people and to make sure that we've got the quality jobs that we've talked about, or do the other things that we need. So the first most important thing we managed to do was not actually about how we use the taxation powers, is to make sure we protected the Scottish budget in the first place.
Thank you, Fiona. David, one very fast minute.
Okay, very fast minute. Very fast minute will be, sorry we haven't talked, one of the power lights in Scotland is immigration. As Jim said, we really need to build our population in this country, as they're doing in Sydney and other places. Singapore have done it famously as well. We really need to do that desperately. And we support, for example, post-study work visas as a real strong initiative that we should be forcing through Westminster, despite in every way we possibly can, and all the parties should get together and do that. And my final point is that my favourite people in the world, two people in the world, are my 4-year-old and my 6-year-old granddaughter. And they stay just outside Stevenage, which is not anybody's idea of fun, let me tell you. But I want them back in Scotland. So I want the politicians in Holyrood to help build a country and an economy where their parents will not be attracted, as so many others have been down south. I want them back in Scotland, so they need to get the jobs, the opportunities up here, and that's what I hope for in the very near future.
Well, I don't think we'd all echo that. It just remains me to say thank you again to our panellists and to Brodies, and to all of you for coming and asking questions. I should add, there'll be a full report on today's proceedings in the Sunday Times, Scotland, on Sunday. So be sure and buy a copy. It's very good value. There's lots in it. And finally, I hope you're leaving here perhaps a little bit more informed than you were when you arrived. But if not, I think we can all agree we've had a very good debate and a very good panel and a reasonably hearty breakfast for us all to go to work on. So I'd just like to thank the panel again, if I may, and say goodbye to you. Thank you. Good morning, and happy St. Patrick's Day. Thanks very much. Thank our panel for taking time.
University.
As Jim said, a very mobile work.
But of course, if you look at where we are in terms of
Corporation tax is going to be reduced to 17%, and that's good. I think that attracts business.